communism, Marxism, and all the related ideologies. Just like I told you about, and at last you must have felt that it is not very wise to go very deep into the distinctions of these ideologies, because as a victim, they all mean the same to us. Their end goal is, which I will discuss later in this presentation, is that their end goal is the complete dismantling of Hindu society as such, Hindu tradition, Hindu culture, Hindu civilization completely. So for us, uh, as a result, their impact is just the same. That is why we should not differentiate too much between them. And we should not get into this impression of some very complex words, some new isms, some new ideologies. Like I discussed in the last presentation, the basic idea of Leninist communism, the original communism which took avatar in Soviet Union, was that communism should exist in all countries. They believed that in order for communism to succeed in one country, it has to be established in all countries. And they were so damn serious about this that they created uh, an entire organization, an entire institution to establish communism in all countries. And this design continues even now, even after their mother country has collapsed under different guises. This was the goal of Communist International. Communist International was disbanded 30 years later, but its goals were continued later on all over the world. I remember when I was a child in Gwalior, which is a small city, if you compare it to other Indian cities, it still has a population of around just 13 or 14 lakh. And it was in the language of modern citizenship, provincial city, very backward provincial city. And even in that city, every year during Gwalior Mela, which is a very seminal event in Gwalior, there would be a shop called Progressive Literature. This was financed directly by the Soviet Union. And in that, they would distribute literature which would inculcate atheism and hatred of religion and every form in children right there from the childhood. This culture was not just confined to these isolated melas, isolated publishing houses, and a few books. It was actually the culture of all media houses in India, like the Delhi Press. I have done extensive articles on how Delhi Press tried to dismantle Hinduism in India and still tries to under various guises. It ran various magazines, children's magazines, which Hindu parents quite unknowingly gifted to their children. One of them was Champak. And Champak was, its goal was to inculcate atheism in kids. In an era in which atheism was unpopular even amongst the adults, it tried to inculcate atheism in children. For example, it would run stories like how on Diwali night some evil practices are done, how Navratra is nothing but evil, how Kamad Yatra is nothing but evil, and how religion or religious gurus are just frauds, elaborate frauds. And atheist people are good people, religious people are bad people. So this ran to the level of every little magazine in India. There were, of course, magazines like Chanda Mama, but their reach wasn't as great as this. Nandan at that time was somewhere in between. It ran stories from Puranas and various other myths too. So I grew up reading Nandan. At that time, it was not. It was ran by Hindustan Times. So Hindustan Times was very anti-Hindu, but the children's section was still not as anti-Hindu. Over the years, even that became very anti-Hindu, and now they try to inculcate political ideologies even in kids as young as 9 years old or 10 years old. So this subversion activity did not just happen at the political level. It also happened at the social, academic, and media level. And it went to the level of children. That how to bring up, the parents were not bringing up children when I was a kid anymore. For thousands and thousands of generations, it was the parent, it was the neighborhood, it was dharma which was bringing up children. But since independent India was essentially an adharmic state, because it refused to teach dharma, it was a secular state, and in Hindu terms, in dharmic terms, it is an adharmic state. It still is. It is still secular. So it tried to inculcate, it refused to teach dharma, and all the inputs from media down to the level of magazines and newspapers and movies, serials, even advertisements, where their content was very subtly anti-Hindu. You must now, in the age of social media, you must now be familiar with this phenomena, that how that Tanishq ad um, gave us a good feeling about love jihad, that how it is a good thing that we should do it. All of these factors came together in the 1970s. And the generation which Macaulay was talking about, Hindu only by birth and completely anti-Hindu by not just their dress and food, but in everything that they do and say, it has become true now. Whatever is happening today, our youth who is attracted towards woke activism and all other modern ideologies, anti-Hindu ideologies, it is because this generation, this anti-Hindu deracinated generation, which did not get any instruction of dharma while they were growing up, is now the generation of the parents. They do not know anything about the Hindu dharma, about dharma at all. They outsource the bringing up of their children right from the age of 6 months. Because now both parents in cities are working, so there is nobody at home to bring up the kids. You give your babies to crash at first, and then playgroup schools. And right from the playgroup schools, the inculcation, the anti-Hindu inculcation starts. Various incidents came to our notice recently, in which even LGBTQ activism has reached our schools. Children as young as 4th standard or 5th standards are forced to watch movies showing trans people performing duties which are not meant to perform in their gender, in the old biological system of gender. So this is just one example. There are various other such subversion activities. One of my colleagues here, he took his daughter out of a school because in 6th standard, their school organized a conference on how human rights violation are happening in Kashmir, how India is violating human rights in Kashmir. This is a private school. This is not even a government school. So we say that now the government is ours, whatever that means. But even then, why do these things keep happening? It is because now the deracinated generation has reached a stage where even private universities like Ashoka University or Lovely University or Jindal University, without having any personal or ideological stake in left liberalism, they still imbibe hook, line, and sinker the leftist ideologies, whatever comes from the West, whatever fashionable comes from the West, and they teach it to our children because the entire atmosphere has become vitiated. At first, anti-Hinduism, left liberalism, which was the forte of academia and media, has now become so widespread that it has seeped down to the ground level. Words which were even rare in academic books are now quite popular, even in middle class kids. So this is the ground that we have covered. The deracinated generation that they started to create, it is now complete. And it is this generation which is now governing our schools, our universities. It is making movies, it is making TV serials, it is creating art, it is running art schools, it is running sports academies. Because you can see anti-Hinduism everywhere. So this was the goal of Communist International. The story of this is no longer a secret now. The story that Communist International or Communists tried to subvert national equities. Mitrokin Archive, when it was published in 2010s, somewhere around 2005 or 2006, it became very popular, the second volume, because it told about how KGB subverted national politics in India. There is an entire chapter on India. It is a shocking chapter. I've written articles on it, that how Soviet communist spies were had penetrated so deeply in Indian government that they were right there up in the personal office of the Prime Minister. The office of the Prime Minister, the then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, was also deeply involved in with the communist spies. Uh, we do not yet know whether Indira Gandhi was directly involved, directly was a spy or not. But there are ample samples and evidences that if she was not a direct spy, then she closed her eyes to whatever was happening in the country, whatever the communist spies were doing in her country. If not directly facilitating them, then she turned a blind eye to whatever they were doing. Because in the 1970s, she wanted to take help of the communist parties in India. So the communist parties gave them their help, unconditional help. Their condition was different. They did not want to share power directly. They did not want to share political power directly. They just said, give us academia, give us universities, give us education ministry. And so in her reign, education ministry was came under the leadership of Dr. Nur al Hassan, who was the education minister. He was a Marxist, but a closet Islamist. He called himself a Marxist, but he pursued all the Islamist policies all his throughout his life and career. And he virtually handed over Indian academia, Indian universities, Indian college system, Indian school system on a platter to anti-Hindus, to communists. And they subverted the entire history of India. Now, this is a subject which has been very well covered by Sri Arun Shauriji in Eminent Historians, and various in Only Fatherland, and various other scholars and great scholars have covered that issue. So I won't cover it in detail. You all must now, through social media, must have some idea of how the entire universities were taken over by the communists. They did not judge people based on their talent, based on their merit. They judged people whether they were anti-Hindu or not. If they were anti-Hindu, they were made professors. If they were not anti-Hindu, they were not made professors. How did they perpetuate this system? They would choose only their own. Only the anti-Hindus were invited in. The IAS exams, the IPS exams, all of the national exams, the notes, the teachers that taught their coaching classes, the notes that were created, they were all anti-Hindu in orientation. So if you wanted to become a police commissioner or a collector, if you wanted to do some to enter foreign service or administrative service or police service, you had to cram up all that anti-Hindu agenda and regurgitate it in exams and also later on in your career. This is what they did in these services. So they took over the executive, all of these forces. Then even the judiciary was targeted. Judges were rapidly anti-Hindu. As we now see, that generation of judges has now come of age. Those judges which were lawyers and judges who were adulterated on anti-Hindu texts and anti-Hindu ideologies, left liberal ideologies, now they are sitting in Supreme Court and all other courts. They give judgments like earlier the Sabrimala judgment and all the woke modern anti-Hindu judgments that they are want to make. It is these judges. So they took over education, judiciary, executive, and politics was always theirs, one way or the other. So the change which happened in 2014, that is why we become frustrated, and that is what we should understand about it. The change that happened in 2014 was just a political change. Our education system did not change. The education ministers of the current government say proudly that we have not changed a single word, and you no longer expect them to. So the education system remained as anti-Hindu as ever. The judiciary remained as anti-Hindu as ever. The executive remained as anti-Hindu as ever. So we have to understand what a government is. Government is not just a set of ministers. Ministers come and go, but the people who are the government departments that implement their policies, they are manned by the same anti-Hindus who were working in the under the UPA, under the Congress regimes, under the earlier anti-Hindu regimes. They keep continuing the same agenda, and the ministers above are either they have absolutely no clue of what is going on. Even if they have a clue, they lack the courage to bring some fundamental changes. We hear about these things, like in Pune when that institute about uh, 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 there is a institute, I forget its name or abbreviation, which trains people in acting. So you wonder, why does government open a school to train people in acting? Why does government take a, bother about acting classes? It is entirely a matter of society. It is entirely a matter of entertainment, arts, and the government should not at all be worried about acting as such. And if you see, look over the entire world, only 4 countries have government-run acting schools. One is Cuba, another was Soviet Union, which is now shut down. One is India, one is Vietnam, and only one which is not a communist country is in Australia. So all of these were communist countries who wanted to even direct movies and influence movies. These people are running all of these institutions. So the ads are being made by them, the movies are being made by them, education, judiciary, executive, all of these things are run by anti-Hindu, deracinated Hindus, or directly by uh, Christians and Muslims with an animus against the Hindu society. So this happened, this started during the reign, even earlier during Nehru, and Nehru created a lot of these things, but Indira Gandhi made it the pace very fast, because she was not directly concerned with whether India becomes communist or not. But she loved power like no other. So in exchange of power, she was willing to sell and do anything that is necessary. And so she sold the country to communists, and still all of these institutions are running by anti-Hindus, anti-Hindu communists. Uh, this is a quote by Mitrokin: the entire country was up to sale under the reign of Indira Gandhi. And this alliance was actually very global. An unholy alliance of Islam and the left was made. It was made during 1970s and 80s, when Soviet Union started supporting Palestine. But after the fall of Soviet Union, this alliance became very strong. You might wonder why. Because left is against it, thinks that Islam is the religion is the opium of the masses. Then why would it ally with Islam? But this was very natural alliance. This is very important. You should always keep this image and this slide in your mind. The left currently controls institutions and mercenaries. They have all the institutions, they still control these institutions. They created the institutions of propaganda. They usurped, they took over the existing institutions and made them communist through and through. And they also created a class of professional revolutionaries in academia, media, judiciary, and executive. These are mercenaries. And you understand what mercenaries are. Mercenaries do not care whom they fight for. They have just a skill set. They can fight. They can win wars. You just pay them. They will fight for a pay. You just pay them and they will fight for whatever cause. They don't care. So the left created institutions on one hand and mercenaries on the other hand. This entire apparatus suddenly became useless in 1990 when the Soviet Union fell down. The institutions, there were huge institutions all over the world, which these communists still held. But there was no communism anymore, no Soviet Union anymore. What to do? And the bigger problem was that how would this finance come from? Where would this finance come from? Because they had become mercenaries, they needed constant pay. They needed constant money to run their activities and to live lavish, quite lavish lives. But after the fall of Soviet Union, the problem was that what would happen to this? What would happen to all of this? The institutions and the mercenary. And so Islam suddenly stepped in. And the bottom of the slide says, Islam has goal and money. Its goal is complete Islamization of the world. So is the goal of the church, the complete Christianization of the world. And it also has the money. So problem solved. Left has people to professional revolutions to fight, and institutions where they can fight this, with which they can wage these wars. And Islam has the finance and a goal, a very specific goal. And so they made a very natural alliance. They came together very naturally. This was the unholy alliance, which is still continuing in many, many ways. Earlier, they had captured institutions like ICHR, ICSSR, NCERT. And now people of the current dispensation of the BJP are there controlling these institutions. So people ask the Hindus, you control all of these institutions. Why is not the narrative on your side? Yes, we control these institutions, but only politically. Some political people, some appointees of the government are there controlling these institutions. But the PhD thesis that are being done, the entire university departments which are churning out professors, academicians, researchers, and research scholars, they are all deeply, rabidly, religiously anti-Hindu. So no matter if these one or two persons at the helm, at the top of these institutions are changed, entire workforce that they have to work with, the staff and also the people on to whom they award these grants and money, they are also completely anti-Hindu. So all of the theses that are already being written, they are like domestic violence in India, domestic violence in Shivpuri district, domestic violence in Jhabua district, how Brahminical patriarchy is doing violence against women and children and Dalits and Muslims and all of these. If you see PhDs, one in a 2000 PhDs will not be anti-Hindu. Right now, just the issue of TIS came, in which very rapidly pro-Islamic terrorist PhD thesis is being done, even in private institutions like this. So there are some top-level uh, controllers or officials which are now changed in these institutions, but all the people that they work with are still anti-Hindus. And while some of these institutions are now controlled by Hindus, global institutions are now have become more and more active. They now think that there is a threat that India might have a resurgence, that the Hindus might rise, that the Hindu Renaissance might actually happen. And so all of them have come together. New York Times, Washington Post, Huffington Post, Scroll, which was financed in India. That is what I did a series on. As soon as 2000, the run-up to 2014 elections was happening, they started funding anti-Hindu portals in India like The Wire, Scroll, Karma magazine was a defunct magazine which was revived just to create and further the anti-Hindu agenda. And this agenda is now far worse than ever before. Now their roots are quite deeper, their net is quite wider. And now they are entering the realm of even serious history writing. The caricature that you see here is of a very young so-called historian from Kerala, Manu Pillai. He is very subtly distorting the history of India in the favor of the left, against Hindu Dharma, against Sanatana Dharma. And these people are printed by Penguin and all of the mainstream publishers. And this is what is happening right now. So what do liberals do? Liberalism, you must have seen a change in the names of the departments all over India, which happened in the past few years. When I was a kid, departments were called as Science Department, Humanities Department. Now all of these colleges, private as well as many government colleges, they have an institute or a department of liberal studies. So the very name of the department is now given over to the liberals. So by definition, being conservative is not even possible. There is no possibility at all of being conservative or even centrist. You have to be liberal in order to do liberal studies. So if you want to study history with no political state, you are just a student of history. You have to study liberal studies. This is also an example which one example I gave yesterday. This is also an example of how they take over entire words and phrases and their meaning. They have claimed the word liberal, made it leftist, and now they have renamed entire departments on this word. So they are now all called liberal studies. Why liberal studies? Why cannot it be conservative studies? Why not just humanities? Why not culture studies? Why not civilizational studies? No, they are all liberal studies. So by very name, they declare like Shahada, Allah is the Allah is the only God, Muhammad is his only prophet. So liberalism is the only religion, is the only ideologies, and liberals are the only humans. This is what they declare right from their names. Forget about anything changing, doing any positive or good PhD about Hinduism. So this is how the nexus has become. So they may claim that they do not care about the governments. When liberals say that we are liberals, it doesn't matter. Because for us as Hindus, as victims, it is all the same. These people, the liberals, are the most insensitive, most intolerant of all lot, because they claim that they are the supreme human beings. They care about the human rights of every little marginalized group. And so they are the best lot. They cancel everyone. A lot of this has been happening in the Western universities. Even black journalists who are liberal, who have been liberal their entire lives, even they are cancelled because they say that now you are just being crazy. Now you are just being instituting reverse racism in all of these countries. Scientists like Richard Dawkins are cancelled, who have been liberal and nothing but liberal all of their lives because they are not ready to give in to the agenda of Islam. Even authors like J.K. Rowling, who has been ranting and raving against Trump and everything rightist in the Western world, because she does not support subversion of language under the LGBTQIA rights. She was also cancelled. So the liberal and individual rights has reached to that state. Feminism, its goal is the same. It is to uproot patriarchy. In India, of course, Hinduism is always at the target. So Brahminical patriarchy is always the worst sort of enemy. Now, these radical third feminism, it is called, they are radical feminists. And I'm not kidding. I'm not quoting an extreme case. Their foundational texts, very academic foundational texts, recommend that women should have nothing to do with men, not even marriage, not even sex. They should all become lesbians. They should use artificial insemination if they want to have kids, because they will have to somehow propagate their population. So otherwise, bearing children is considered now very, very patriarchal. So they are all called, this is not pamphlet. I'm not quoting from pamphlet. I'm taking it directly from their textbooks, from their seminal textbooks. This is what they allege. And they are, of course, enemies Hinduism. Then there is woke activism, which is said that if you are living a simple life, if you earn your livelihood honestly, do not oppress anyone, do not do injustice to anyone, you just eat your food, you live a healthy life, then you are a criminal, because you have to work for some interest group. You have to show protest on the streets. You have to destroy public property. You have to protest against the government. You have to protest against everything traditional. If a married couple is going, married so-called heterosexual couple is going on a road, then you have to protest against them because they are promoting heterosexuality and creating hatred against homosexuality. This sort of activism is called woke activism. It came to fore too much in the recent BLM movement in the West, and it has become very popular in India too. Marriage has always been a curse word amongst feminists and all of these liberal activists, but now every sort of relation between man and woman is considered evil. They are creating reverse racism and sexism. So if you are not a Dalit in India, then you are a criminal. If you are not a woman, if you are not a Dalit, if you are not a Muslim, if you are not handicapped, then you are a healthy male and non-Dalit and non-Muslim. Then you are the worst sort of criminal. So just by your birth, you become a criminal for these people. And this is no exaggeration. This is in their textbooks. They issue textbooks, 60, 80 pages textbooks, which are their very titles are how to textbook for intervention in a new society. So they declare their agenda from the outside. We have to make intervention in these societies. How to dismantle traditional structures. These are the titles of books. And they inculcate their activists into this activism. The only thing that they do is to destroy whatever exists. And in the anarchy that is created, concentrated militant minorities like Islamic fundamentalism and Christian missionaries, they overtake in the confusion, the anarchy, the chaos that ensues, they overtake and control our society. You must remember I talked about evolutionary socialism in the last lecture. Actually, entire world was taken over by socialism. Russia, Eastern Europe, China, and all of these communist countries, they were taken over by revolutionary socialism, while France, Germany, England, Netherlands, Holland, all of Scandinavia, even Spain and Italy later on, and increasingly America and Canada, they also went on the path of evolutionary socialism, which meant pursuing socialist goals through democratic countries. One by one of the two parties in America and all of these countries would advocate a very socialist cause, make it their one of their election agendas, and implement that socialist cause in society. And in the evolution of this socialism, socialist causes, espousing socialist causes, it would escalate to a point where no conservative parties left, which is now the condition of Europe. We say that right is rising there. There is no right there left anymore. No sort of Christian right. There are some groups outside politics who are violent, who give some violent response to them, far right. But apart from that, no so-called conservatives in Western European societies, they are, if you consider their agendas, they are also liberal, very, very liberal. So an entire conquest of the world politics was made by socialism at last. It was evolutionary socialism. Welfare state, which is the rights only society, is a consequence of this evolutionary socialism. Welfare state means that if you are jobless, like this says, then you have to be paid by the government. Not only you are handicapped or orphan, if you are jobless, if you do not want to do a job, if you don't just feel like it, the government will not ask you anything. It will just give you some money to spend your life in pleasure. If someone says that you should work, then you can actually sue him or her in court because you had psychological trauma. And the government might also pay for the fee of your lawyer. This is the stage where the Western society has reached, Western Europe has reached. America is not yet there, but they are increasingly pushing with the loss of Trump and the triumph of Biden, Sleepy Joe. America is also proceeding on the same path. This woke activism is called, they say that we are fighting for social justice, racial justice. We are fighting for diversity, justice, equity, and all of these buzzwords. But mostly it is racial justice, gender justice, and LGBTQIA rights. In gender justice, in racial justice in America, they are just creating a reverse racism where being white is just bad. If you are born a white male, then you are just evil. Doesn't matter how much you fight for racial justice. In gender justice, if you are a male and not actively fighting for very radical feminism, then you are evil, just evil. And if you're not a homosexual, then also you are evil. The LGBTQIA rights, we have to pay attention towards these changes in the West. At one time, they were killing homosexuals by throwing them off roofs. The punishment for homosexuality in Bible is sometimes very slashes and sometimes just killing. The punishment of homosexuality in Islam is directly killing. So they were at their society just about 100 years ago was at that stage. Alan Turing, who created this computer that we are all working on, this entire Jagat, this entire world of computers was created by Alan Turing and his algorithms. He was forced to castrate himself by the British government because he was a homosexual. This happened in 1941, not even 100 years ago. And now, after 100 years, they have gone to the other extreme, where they do not just tolerate. Of course, you can tolerate, you should tolerate. They don't just tolerate, but the value system of homosexuality or LGBTQIA, intersex, and others, these people is considered the mainstream value system. And if you are not that, you are considered already looked at with a suspicious eye. Children as young as 5 years old are being guided by the state-run schools whether they are homosexual or not, without the permission of their parents. This is already happening in the UK because their schooling is compulsory and all schools are almost state-run schools. And state has taken over this drive to create gender justice in society. And they assume that parents suppress the sexuality of their children because they are brought up in quite superstitious religious atmosphere. So these schools, they ask boys and girls as young as 4 and 5 years old, what do you feel? Do you feel attracted towards boys or girls? Oh, then you are, then you are a lesbian, then you are gay, then you are. There are various same 63 genders now. So pansexual, bisexual, and different sexualities. And this is by law. This is being done against the consent of their parents. Now, the society always talks about consent in marriage, but not it does not talk about consent where parents do not have a right to bring up their own children in a matter as private as sexuality or sex. So the state is now instructing, leading these people, kids as young as 5 years old, in all of these, whether they are pansexual or bisexual or cis or trans, and all of the 63 genders. This is the stage where these LGBTQI rights have reached to. How does this work? Why does this happen? They create these victimhood narratives. And these narratives play right into the hands of NGO lobbies. Various NGO lobbies, NGO business is now the greatest in the world. Even after the clampdown by the Modi government on various of these NGOs, they have entered through many back doors. They have even increased funding in various other sectors and areas. So these NGOs, what do? They look for an interest group in a society. If there is no group, they go over and try and create these groups. They collect money in their name and they live lavish lives over that. I was very surprised to know that Modi government, the BJP government, brought down personal expenses of these NGOs from 80% to 30%. So in just 4 or 5 years ago, 80% of the donations that they got from all over this world for fighting for women, gays, and minorities and Dalits, they could use 80 to 50% in their own salaries. So just by writing pamphlets in some newspapers, who are all in a nexus, they would be getting not just salaries, but stipends as rich as 10 to 20 to 30 lakhs per month per person. So this is a huge business. It currently also functions in Africa and all other so-called third world countries. So these NGO lobbies, it is their vested interest to divide and deconstruct, destroy a society into its various components. So if a society is united, then their narrative won't set because they cannot fight for entire society. So they'll say, we will fight for women of this area. We'll fight for gays. We'll fight for Dalits. We'll fight for this caste. We'll fight for that caste. We'll fight for this region and that region. Let's say they talk about diversity, but on the other hand, they keep strengthening these regional caste and gender identities. And so they create a small interest groups, NGO lobbies, and they encourage victimhood narratives. Victim within victim within victim. So know your privilege. So if you are a male and not a Dalit, not a Muslim, they will say know your privilege. That you are you access the privilege of Brahminical patriarchy. You are a male. You dominate women. You dominate Dalits. You oppress Muslims. You oppress because you are not homosexual. Then you oppress homosexuals. Then the victim, the counterpart, a corollary of this is victimhood narratives. They will go to a Dalit woman who is so many considered to be so many layers of oppressed. First of all, she's a woman. Then she's a Dalit woman. Then she might be also homosexual. If she is a lesbian, then she is so many layers of oppressed that 4 or 5 of these interest groups can claim to fight for her. So all of these individuals in small groups, they are encouraged to create these identities. You must be familiar with the so-called reality shows, which are nothing but reality. But everyone is encouraged to cry. I was poor, I was struggled, my father left me when I was a kid, and my mother went with someone else, or all of these stories are now spilled over on stages. Just few decades ago, everyone's life had some sort of difficulty, hardship. Everyone bore these hardships with equanimity. We were taught to not cry in public, not to just spill our beans in public, to have a little composure in public, to have a dignity in public. But now we are encouraged to just cry, just to shed tears in public so that some we might sound as a victim in front of someone. So you are good only if you're a victim. You are bad if you're not a victim. So if you're not a victim, then you must be privileged. And being privileged is such a curse now that everyone wants to be a victim. So they are dividing society into very small groups of different sorts of victims. And then they pick one or two of these groups, collect money, and create all of these narratives. So Hindu society is always at the top. Now, this is not just without any direction. Church has infiltrated these groups. Islamic groups have infiltrated these groups. In CAA riots, anti-Hindu riots, you saw that a lot of anti-Hindu, directly anti-Hindu, fuck Hindu, and a lot of these naras, these slogans were created. And our gods and goddesses were directly abused in the CAA anti-Hindu riots. So Islam and church has already infiltrated all of this. They are financing and creating dissent. You saw just the toolkits. Toolkits are now very famous. I don't need to focus on them. So they finance these and create dissent. And our youth who are deracinated, our kids whom we gave to state to bring up, right? From the time when they were just 3 months old. Now they are in the hands of these NGO interest groups because we refuse to bring them up. When we both had to work outside, when we both wanted to have our me time, our personal time, now the state is bringing them up, and the state is an adharmic state. These interest groups are very, very anti-Hindu. Then a new buzzword is intersectionality, which is also a form of the Marxist, socialist, communist, liberal, leftist, anti-Hindu impulse. If you just forgive me for 1 minute, I will have some water and then continue. Ashutosh, you can also switch on your video. It feels bad to stare at black screen.
Anji.
Not get very confused when you go to internet and Wikipedia, you will get very elaborate definitions of it. Very simply, intersectionally is priority math to solve woke fights. इसका क्या मतलब हुआ? Now there are various interest groups who are these activists, woke activists, like feminists, radical feminists, LGBTQI activists, social justice activists. What if they fight between each other? Because right now, great fight is going on between feminists and LGBTQI activists. Feminists say that they are the greater victims. LGBTQI activists say that they are the greater victims. Their identities clash with each other. Intersectionality say that even if these fights surface, we should not fight right now and destroy the traditional society first. So you should put your fights at internal fights on hold. So if feminists are fighting with LGBTQI activists, you should put those fights on hold. First, dismantle Brahminical patriarchy, by which they mean destroy Hindu culture, society, and civilization first. That should be your primary objective. Do not at all let your fights get out in public. This is what intersectionality is. So they have created a very elaborate maths of who is preferred over what is the priority order. If there is fight, who will be prioritized over other groups. So it is simply intersectionality is their tool to remain silent while they are destroying and dismantling Hindu society. That is the definition. You will not find on Wikipedia. It is also being run by Woke Junkie. So do not go there for learning all of your terms and definitions. But this is what it means for the Hindu society. Sitaram Goyal ji and Ram Swarup ji had been shouting almost 50 years ago. They were saying this, that India is the last playground. China is closed. Africa is converted. Americas are gone, Europe is gone, Australia is just one country, it is also gone. India is the last great stand of dharma, last great stand of traditional society. If India falls, the stand of dharma as of now will fall. There might be a dark ages of 1000 years, next 1000 years, if India falls. It is that critical. I'm not saying it will. I have very high hopes that it will succeed and destroy all of these Asuric forces in the world. But this is the stake. This is how important the fight here in India is. And if India wins, if Bharatvarsh wins, if Hinduism wins, if Sanatan Dharma wins, the entire world will have a very great spiritual renaissance, which is long overdue. We are destroying our ecology. We are destroying our society. We are destroying nature and culture, both of them. If Bharatvarsh wins, if Hindu Dharma wins, then both nature and culture will have a fighting chance. How do they destroy Hindu society? Feminists find problem with, of course, Hindu marriage, so dismantle marriage. Jati and Varn were always targeted, so the broad society was at first dismantled. Then now they have started finding fault with marriage itself. And they are pushing this narrative legally by law through judiciary in various of these laws. Now they are talking about marital rape. And all political parties across the board have are unanimous that, of course, there should be laws of marital rape. When you consider this, when you hear about marital rape, you might say, so what's bad with these laws? Of course, rape shouldn't happen anywhere. Yes, rape shouldn't happen anywhere. But just think about it. How does law work? When you say that one person killed another person, you need evidence, because the criminal will never accept his crime. The murderer will never say and go in court and never say that, yes, I murdered him. The cases are never as clear cut as this. You need evidence. What is the evidence that in marriage in that night there was a consent or not? Whether it was a rape or not. The husband will always say he did not rape. The wife will always say, if the case goes to court, that there was rape. What is the method that you can decide who is saying the truth and who is uttering falsehood? Unless you have a state representative in every bedroom of India, always witnessing these most private acts, ready to give witness in court if a case of marital rape happens. Or this cannot happen, we all know it is absurd. Or we imagine that men are evil, women are good. So if they say in court that they were raped in marriage, then you have to believe them. So they push these narratives and couched in very fine language. And you think that this is a good cause. But just try to think over it a little. How are you going to prove this? This is virtually going to destroy the entire institution of marriage in India if they go ahead with these laws. And no political party is going to come to save you. All of these political parties, when Madhu Kishwarji talks with these parties, they say that Madhu ji humse suicide karne ko mat kijiye, political suicide karne ko mat kijiye. We are not going to say anything. We know it is bad. We are not going to say anything. And this is how it happens across the political boards. But this is, all of these agendas are being pushed legally on our society. They find problems with our dharma shastras, of course, all our rituals and customs. Kanyadan is commodification. So the most exalted of our rituals and custom is being slandered like this. If you are familiar with any Hindu rituals and customs and scriptures, the most famous episode in Kathopanishad starts with Dan, and that Dan is about giving away something which you most prize. And in that case, it was his son. He gives him away in anger, but it is a case of Dan, of giving away something that you dearly love. It has got nothing to do with daughter or son, but they find problem with everything. Woke activists, of course, find problems with anything, including our festivals. First of all, private Hindu life is destroyed by all these laws. Then public Hindu life is also destroyed. Now you cannot celebrate even your festivals in public because it has gender lobbies come that in Holi molestation happens. In Diwali, pollution happens. In Gurkha, nothing happens. That is, of course, very hip and liberal. So the goal of all these liberals is, the end goal is to destroy all Hindu institutions like family, marriage, jati, one, regional identity, gender, and even age. Because while they say that children as young as 6 or 7 should be sexually aware, even people as old as 80 years old, they should have a life. So they take away your age identity. The end game is the deracinated crop, as I talked about, is now ready. They are ready to believe anything, do anything. And narratives are being set by big corporations, Islam and Christianity. Woke, intersectionality, radical feminism, etc., are nothing but Marxists with different names. And their goal is that Hindu society, Hindu religion is evil. We have to dismantle it. That agenda is far from gone with the fall of Soviet Union or with the coming of this government. It is going apace. Despite their efforts to control it, despite the government's efforts to control these things, it is proceeding apace. So this is the condition right now. The only solution that I see is that non-state organizations like YDF itself and various other organizations like this try to spread this awareness more and more in their daily lives. And because Sitaramji and Ram Sarupji, 30, 40 years ago, without any help of technology, they set out and wrote 60 to 70 books. And within a generation, there are now 10,000 like us who are ready to take their awareness, cultural awareness ahead. So if they could do this with, against the state, against everything working against them 40 years ago, then if these 10,000 people right now also set about creating awareness in our society about Hindu issues, then I'm sure within a generation, 3 decades later, we will have a great crop of very civilizationally assured and culturally proud Hindus who can not only counter all of these agendas, but can create many like their own. So I'm very hopeful about the situation, but you also have to be aware of how serious the situation is. So this is where I end now.